All right, in this lesson, I want to give you 7 steps for identifying and analyzing arguments. Now, when you encounter arguments out in the wild, they're not going to be neatly set up in numbered premises and conclusions in the way that our Tinker Toy examples have been in our logic unit. Instead, you're going to get just a bunch of prose, either on a page or maybe in a conversation or on the television, and you're going to have to make sense out of where are the premises here, what's the conclusion, and is this argument any good? And so identifying the argument is an important prelude to evaluating it. And I want to give you these 7 steps that you can follow, and you can apply this, and I want you to apply this to the arguments that you encounter in our textbook this semester. Okay, so the first step that I'm going to give you is to start at the end. Find the conclusion. Now, how do you find the conclusion of an argument? Well, one clue that you'll often encounter are conclusion keywords. So when you see words like therefore, the statement that follows the therefore is going to be the conclusion of the argument. Here's some synonyms for therefore. Thus, so, must have been, hence, consequently, it follows that. All of these are red flags that say, I'm about to announce the conclusion that you're supposed to accept on the basis of other premises. So, for example, everyone who served on the jury was a registered voter, and Jones served on the jury. Therefore, Jones was a registered voter. Now, what's your keyword here? Therefore, big red flag. The conclusion of this argument is that Jones was a registered voter. So, you won't always get these red flag keywords, but when they're there, tune into them. Then you're going to want to find the premises. And we're going to start with the premises that are explicitly stated. And premises also have keywords. So when you see words like this, like because, since, for, given that, assuming that, those are all saying the statement that's going to follow is a premise. So back to Jones. Jones was a registered voter because Jones served on the jury, and everyone who served on the jury was a registered voter. What's our keyword here? Because. That tells us the premises are what followed the because. Jones served on the jury, etc. And the conclusion, notice, was the statement that came first in this passage. In the wild, friends, conclusions can be stated at the beginning of a passage, before the premises, in the middle, in between the premises, or at the end. You have to sort out, based on context and keywords, what the premises are and what the conclusion is. So that's what I just said. Sometimes there's not going to be keywords and you just have to use context. In this class, when we formalize an argument, we list the premises first and the conclusion last, and we number each line. That's what we're going for. So try this one. Since everyone who served on the jury was a registered voter, Jones must have been a registered voter, for Jones served on the jury. What's your first keyword? Since. That signals a premise. Must have been is a keyword which signals conclusion. And for signals another premise. So we've got a premise, we've got a conclusion sandwiched between two premises. Now, after you've identified the stated premises and the conclusion, you want to try to trace a plausible route from the premises to the conclusion. In other words, you want to figure out, is there a valid or a strong argument from these premises to the conclusion? And if not, what are the missing or unstated premises that are necessary to make this a valid deductive argument or a strong inductive argument? So look at this. Jones must have been a registered voter, for he served on the jury. Now, what we've got here is a conclusion and one premise. But there's a missing premise that's necessary in order to make this valid. I mean, of course, it's possible, it's conceivable that Jones served on the jury but wasn't a registered voter. Unless this is an unstated premise. All the jurors were registered voters. So you need to fill in that unstated premise that's necessary to make this a good argument. Or take this one, for example. The unstated premise was that Jones served on the jury. Now, it's important to state unstated premises explicitly so that we can examine them and see if they're believable or not. An argument that has missing premises or a missing conclusion or both is called an enthymeme. Technical term, I don't care if you know it or not. When you're dealing with enthymemes, you want to use the principle of charity. And that means you should choose the reconstructed argument that's going to give the benefit of the doubt to the person presenting the argument. Assume that they meant to say that and just left it out. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Be charitable. Now here's a pro tip. If you're trying to figure out how to fill in the missing premises of an enthymeme, use modus ponens. You can turn any two statements into a valid instance of modus ponens if you add a conditional statement. So for example, let's say somebody makes this crazy argument. Johnny's in the basement mixing up the medicine. Therefore, conclusion, I'm on the pavement thinking about the government. Now you see that and you think, I have no idea what that even means, let alone how that conclusion is supposed to follow from that premise. But it doesn't matter if you know what it means or not. You can make that a valid modus ponens argument by just creating an if P then Q conditional premise. What's that going to say? If Johnny's in the basement mixing up the medicine, then I'm on the pavement thinking about the government. And right now, you've just charitably reconstructed that into a valid instance of modus ponens, a valid argument. Use that, use that. Here's some more practice examples you can do on your own time. Step 5, clarify the meaning of key terms. A lot of times there's going to be a key term in an argument that determines whether or not this argument is sound or not. Okay, so take this one for example. This is from James Rachel's. If we can benefit someone without harming anyone else, we ought to do so. Transplanting baby Teresa's organs would benefit other children without harming baby Teresa. Therefore, we ought to transplant baby Teresa's organs. Now, okay, there's this kind of grim example in the background where baby Teresa is a baby born with anencephaly, and they're talking about transplanting all of her organs. Now, when you do that, you're going to kill baby Teresa. So the question is, there is a term here that seems to be used with a very debatable meaning. If there's one term in this argument that we need to get clear on before we can tell whether the premises are true or not, what would it be? Well, in my book, it would be the meaning of harm. Transplanting baby Teresa's organs is going to kill her. So what exactly do you mean by saying it's not going to harm her? What do you mean by harm? We've got to get clear on that before we can evaluate whether the premises are true. Step 6. Now we are in a position to determine whether the argument is logically correct. And by this I mean, is it valid if it's a deductive argument, or is it strong if it's an inductive argument? Assuming the premises are true, do they really support the conclusion? We're not asking yet whether the premises are true. We're just asking about the logic. Right, that's what I just said. So after we've determined whether or not the argument is logically any good, now we ask, finally, step 7, are the premises of the argument true? Okay, so consider the following valid argument. Socrates is a cat. All cats are mortal. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Not immortal, but mortal. Now, this argument's valid, but premise 1 is false. Socrates is not a cat, but a famous Greek philosopher, and all too human. So this argument is not sound even though it's logically valid. Of course, you could have other examples where it is sound. So here's the possible assessments, and you've already seen these, but possible assessments of a deductive argument. If you decide that it's logically valid and the premises are all true, then you've got a sound argument. And that means you buy the conclusion. The conclusion has to be true. If you think that it's a valid argument, that is, if the premises were true, then the conclusion would be sound, but you think that actually one or more of the premises are false, then it's valid but not sound. No dice. Maybe you can't tell whether or not the premises are true or false. You think it's a valid argument, but you're not sure about the premises. In that case, it's valid and possibly sound, but we've got no reason to buy into it yet. And then finally, if the argument's not valid, then it's definitely not solid. It's definitely not sound. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. You lose if it's not valid. Now, what if you've got an inductive argument? Well, same process. The gold standard is cogency. That means the argument is strong and the premises are true. Therefore, the conclusion is probably true. It's possible that you've got a strong argument, but not cogent. That is, one or more of the premises are false. Now, if the premises had been true, they would have given strong support to the conclusion, but in fact, the premises are false. Another possibility is you're just not sure whether or not the premises are true. So if they're true, they strongly support the conclusion, but you don't know whether they are. In that case, you've got no reason to accept the conclusion yet. And then finally, if you've got a weak argument, that means that even if these premises are true, they do not strongly confirm the conclusion. So you're not buying the conclusion if that's the case as well. Those are your steps. Live them. Learn them, love them, live them.